John Dickerson, I'm paraphrasing him, once said that all artful rulers strive to expand the powers that they're allowed to exercise, which they really can't expand now. And then they try to come up with explanations to make it sound as legitimate or legal as possible. So I want to go ahead and paraphrase now Dallin H. Oaks. When we're discussing the Constitution and what's constitutional, discussing the wisdom of the policy is not the same as discussing whether or not it's constitutional. So explanations, if they're not rooted in the pure text and truth of the Constitution, aren't good at all. They do not suddenly grant constitutionality to something because it sounds like a good idea. So Dallin H. Oaks points out that discussing the wisdom of the policy versus discussing its constitutionality, again, two completely separate topics. Let's see, there we go. It's always, which vehicle am I driving here? So anyhow, I think that there's a tendency for the power to expand and expand. The earliest tendency I can find where it really got out of control, I mean, John Adams, we could point to that. We could point to the Sedition Acts. He should have known better. He was, John Adams, right? Well, this is Dusty. I must live on country roads, right? And then, but that's not serious. As a matter of fact, Jefferson just came along, trying to be a strict constitutionalist, and simply pardoned everybody who was arrested for it or charged with it, right? So that's the early days. It was corrected. Now you get, we have to remember the 10th Amendment, guys. 10th Amendment. We have 3 branches of government at the federal level, but there's other branches besides that, and I've broken them up. Branches of responsibility being the states, the officers of government, and the people, right? But anyhow, the 10th Amendment says, if a power is not delegated to the federal government nor prohibited to the states, it's reserved to either the states or the people. In other words, reserved means federal government, don't touch it. So now, say for example, the federal government says something needs to be done. This is a wise policy, it's a good policy, but the Constitution doesn't allow it to be done, right? Can they just force it on us anyhow? No, the Constitution says no. Now, there was an example set back in May 15th of 1776 where the Continental Congress sent out a memo to all the states saying, hey, we're all getting ready to declare independence. We decided we can't reconcile with Great Britain. So you guys, just want to let you know so that you can start pulling together whatever you need to pull together that you think is wise for each of your states, government-wise. So that you can be governed. In other words, they weren't claiming the authority of the Continental Congress to start governing the states. Rather, they sent it out. You guys start figuring something out. This is the appropriate action. When something's not delegated to you yet, but you know it's a wise policy, send it out to the states. Go figure. It's not that complicated. Okay? But Andrew Jackson now. This is where I think one of the first people, the king of explanations, if you ask me. I'm not a super historian. I don't care to be a super historian. I'm just annoyed at the violations of the Constitution and how much it's hard to hold an intelligent conversation. There's no picking on you. If you're here, you're here because you're trying. Okay? But Andrew Jackson comes up with an explanation for the supremacy of the federal government that isn't based on Article 6, Clause 2. Because Article 6, Clause 2 says this Constitution and the laws and the treaties which shall be made in pursuance thereof shall be the supreme law of the land. Has to be pursuant to the Constitution, and you have to be able to bring it out of the text of the Constitution, not out of the general overall concept. This is Justice Breyer language. Justice Breyer language, I would call him someone who's willing to apostatize because he thinks it makes sense. He just thinks it's good policy, and so who cares if the Constitution doesn't allow it, or what have you, or the Constitution does allow it, whatever. If he thinks it shouldn't be allowed, then he'll use the wisdom of the policy and the overall kind of concept of the Constitution as opposed to the actual text, right? But a written Constitution, the whole value of it is, go figure, the text. Otherwise, you've got no Constitution at all, right? So anyhow, Andrew Jackson, they passed this tariff of abominations, and this is before John C. Calhoun went extreme. As a matter of fact, there's psychology you can study where someone gets bullied the way this happened. A lot of times the person becomes extreme, not because they would have become extreme anyhow, but because they were bullied, right? So John C. Calhoun says the Constitution lays out the purposes for which you can exercise these powers. So yes, you have these enumerated powers and these procedures for exercising them, but they have to be for constitutional purposes, and it says it right there in the Constitution. It has to be for the general welfare, it has to be for the common defense, it has to be for this, for that. But basically what happened was they were using the tariff power to make things more expensive for the Southerners doing their exports, and make things more profitable for the Northerners. So significantly so, as a matter of fact. So it's called the Tariff of Abominations, and South Carolina basically said, you try to enforce that here, it's unconstitutional as heck based on the purposes the Constitution allows, and we won't let you. You're not allowed to enforce that here. Well, you might say, well, what authorizes South Carolina to prohibit the federal government when they're the supreme law of the land? No, the Constitution and the laws and the treaties made in pursuance of the Constitution are the supreme law of the land. If it's not in pursuance of the purposes of the Constitution, it's not in pursuance of the Constitution. I'm sorry. So this is the fact. So then you're like, well, who has the power then to nullify something that's unconstitutional? 10th Amendment. Let's look at it again. Powers not delegated to the federal government nor prohibited to the states are reserved to the states or to the people, respectively. Was the concept of nullification a known concept at the time? Yes, I mean, Samuel Adams, you can go to his writings long before we ever declared independence. Plenty of other people talked like this. An act in violation of our Constitution is void and of no effect, right? And they were referring to a Constitution even before there was a written Constitution. They were like, you're claiming powers you can't claim unto yourself. So the 10th Amendment makes it clear. That's the only way the Constitution was going to get ratified, is if you agreed to make a Bill of Rights. Now you're saying that Bill of Rights doesn't really mean what it says it means. That's called a bait and switch. But really, I think Andrew Jackson, I don't know what's up with that dude. He freaks me out because he just gives an explanation for the supremacy of the federal government that's not based on the text at all. Doesn't defend the constitutionality of the act other than we're the federal government, so we're supreme. We win around here, dudes, right? It's a good policy, so we're just going to go and force you guys to follow it. That's literally what happened, okay? So this is the early days of an artful ruler explaining why he's exercising a power, but not finding it where it's in the text or anything like that, and not being able to prove that that's not a power reserved to South Carolina to nullify, to review the constitutionality of what's being imposed on them. It absolutely is a power until the Constitution deals with that otherwise, period. Don't give me any explanations. Surely somebody's got to be the final arbiter. Hey, great explanation. We're not, as Delaney Choke said, discussing the wisdom of the policy versus the constitutionality of it. Two separate topics. Big time. Two completely separate topics, okay? Moving on, Abraham Lincoln. Once again, a fantastic explanation. Even references like the Articles of Confederation and stuff like that. Surely it must be this way. Surely it must be that way. It needs to be. Otherwise, it's no good. This is good policy. This is an important policy, right? Is it constitutional? No. Is it constitutional to force a state to remain in the Union? Is the topic addressed whatsoever in the Constitution? No. It's not. Therefore, if it's not... 10th Amendment, guys, look. The powers not delegated to the federal government, nor prohibited to the states, are reserved to the states or the people. Period. If you try to amend the Constitution through any other means, you try to add a power into it that doesn't exist with the federal government, or take a power away from the state governments that does exist with them, which basically everything, okay, so here's what's delegated to the federal government, everything this side of the line remains with the states or the people, which is a bunch. You got this little group of things right here. The federal government might say, hey, it's wise for us to have this here too. It's what great, but is it there? If it's not there, it's not constitutional. I don't care how wise your explanation is. All artful rulers try to find a way to expand their powers and then give it as much semblance of legitimacy as possible. So now I'm going to point to one more thing real quick here. 1925, to make the Judges Act. They basically say, now look, courts are constitutionally obligated. Look up Dallin H. Oaks. His talk at the University of Virginia, to confine themselves to the case before them. They aren't supposed to be deciding what the Constitution is. That's what the Constitution allows. They're constitutionally obligated to confine themselves to the case before them, because each case has different details. There's nothing in Article 3 that says the decisions of the courts shall be for all intents and purposes. And I don't care what explanation you come up with for me. The explanation doesn't count. All artful rulers try to expand their power and come up with a good explanation for it. No, period. Until you come up with amending the Constitution, codifying it somehow, it's not codified. Article 1, Section 7, Clause 2, that's codified. Article 2, Section 2, Clause 2, that's codified. Article 5, that's codified, right? Article 7 was codified at the moment, right? So this Judges Act, basically these guys decide the Supreme Court's going to stop dealing with most cases that are just cases, and they're going to start mostly focusing on constitutional questions so that they can define the Constitution for everyone else. Please show me in Article 3 where that's allowed. And what's the procedure? What's the specific procedure to make it binding on the rest of us? Because everything that's binding on the rest of us, in Article 6, Clause 2, the Constitutional laws and the treaties, right? In other words, amendments of the Constitution for all intents and purposes, all of them have very specific procedures, very specific thresholds, very specific checks and balances. In other words, both houses of Congress plus the president, or else 2/3 of both houses plus 3/4 of the states' Congresses. It's not there. It's just not there. So, but again, all artful rulers try to expand their powers as much as possible and give it a good explanation. When you watch the movie Adams, yes, I don't know how accurate this is, but it shows Adams trying to explain why he did what he did to Jefferson. It's not a great explanation, but the thing was easily remedied. Jefferson remedied it as soon as he got into office. Jackson, that wasn't remedied. It happened and it stayed permanent. People started getting afraid of nullifying anymore. Lincoln, it happened and it got even worse. Judges Act, as far as I'm concerned, they basically codified it saying the federal government's going to start deciding what powers the federal government has and which ones the states doesn't have. Period. That's really what they're doing. The Constitution does not allow for them to do that. You can discuss the wisdom of the policy all you want, as Dallin H. Oaks says, but until you've codified it, it's not there. And as J. Reuben Clark says, if you attempt to amend the Constitution in any other way than the prescribed manner, we are committing sin, and we will soon lose our freedoms over it. Well, what's soon? Because that's been over 100 years, barely over 100 years at this point, but still. And the other things go back almost 200 years at this point. You're going back to 1831, 1832, something like that, right? So, anyhow, so I had a conversation with my wife this morning. I'm like, government has no right to micromanage us. They've got very limited enumerated powers. If they are legitimately exercising those powers, we're obligated to follow them. But they should never push them too far, micromanage things too far, what have you. And people shouldn't be constantly tattling on us. If we know we're being micromanaged by everyone around us, that's unacceptable. However, the people clearly asserted themselves to be allowed to be the micromanagers of the government. I would recommend looking at Articles 4 and 5 in the Constitution as the states being one branch. Then look at Article 6 as the officers of government having the obligation to check the Constitution for themselves. And then Article 7 through the first few Bill of Rights amendments, right? The people are clearly obligated. I mean, we've told God holds us accountable for our actions in relationship to government. So if we uphold a law that's constitutional, we will be blessed for it. If we uphold a law that's unconstitutional, there will be a price for it. Whether it's by our own indifference that we uphold it, or whether it's by, even though we know it's unconstitutional, all we do is come up with great explanations for why it needs to be done. As soon as you start going down that explanations road, we're not discussing the wisdom of the policy. We're discussing whether it's constitutional or not. And if you modify the Constitution through anything other than the approved means, it's sin, and there will be a price to pay for it. But again, all artful rulers try to expand their powers and give it as much semblance of legality as possible. So anyhow, that's my thoughts for you guys. Thanks for listening. We'll talk to you later.